I need this job to survive, but I never expected to be interviewed by the stranger I married yesterday. Charan's heart stopped as she entered the CEO's office, recognizing the man behind the desk as Mr. Ye, her impulsive wedding decision made to fulfill her dying mother's wish. What begins as an impossible workplace situation turns deadly when jealous Liu Qing, obsessed with winning Mr. Ye for herself, targets Charan with escalating attacks. From rumor campaigns to physical threats, Charan's unexpected marriage becomes a battlefield where losing could cost not just her heart, but her life. Follow Charan's story, a desperate marriage that turns into a fight for survival against a jealous rival. To see how it unfolds, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with others. Thank you for your support. Charan smoothed her skirt one final time before entering the towering glass building that housed Ye Group. Her mother's hospital bills were piling up faster than she could manage on her current salary, and this opportunity at one of the city's most prestigious companies felt like her last hope. She clutched her portfolio tighter, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. This wasn't just an interview, it was a lifeline. The receptionist directed her to the 32nd floor with a polite smile. As the elevator ascended, Charan rehearsed her qualifications under her breath, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She had researched everything about the company, prepared answers to every possible question, but nothing could have prepared her for what awaited behind the interview room door. When Charan entered the sleek conference room, time seemed to freeze. Sitting at the head of the table was Mr. Ye, the same man she had married just yesterday in a hasty ceremony at the Civil Affairs office. The stranger whose ring she now wore, hidden on a chain beneath her blouse. The man who had agreed to fulfill her dying mother's wish to see her daughter married before she passed. Their eyes met across the polished surface of the conference table. For a fraction of a second, Mr. Ye's composed expression faltered, but he recovered so quickly, Charan wondered if she had imagined it. Her own shock was harder to disguise. Her portfolio slipped from her suddenly numb fingers, sending papers scattering across the floor. "Ms. Charan Lin, I presume?" Mr. Ye's voice was cool and professional as he gestured to the chair across from him. Not a hint of recognition colored his tone. "Please, have a seat." Charan fumbled to collect her documents, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening. The agreement had been clear. A paper marriage only, a favor from a stranger she'd met through a mutual acquaintance who happened to know of her desperate situation. They had barely spoken 10 sentences to each other during the entire process. She never expected to see him again until the divorce papers needed signing. "Thank you for coming in today," he continued, as if they were perfect strangers. His calm demeanor anchored her, and Charan forced herself to follow his lead. She had no choice. This job was everything. The interview proceeded with excruciating normalcy. Mr. Ye asked standard questions about her experience and qualifications, while two other executives nodded and took notes. Charan responded automatically, her training taking over, while her mind struggled to process this impossible coincidence. How could the CEO of Ye Group be the same man she had married? Had he known all along who she was when he agreed to the arrangement? Throughout the interview, Mr. Ye maintained his impeccable professionalism, giving no indication that less than 24 hours ago, they had stood before a government official and become legally bound to one another. His dark eyes revealed nothing as they assessed her responses with clinical detachment. Charan fought to match his composure, though her heart hammered so loudly she feared everyone in the room could hear it. When asked about her greatest challenge, she nearly laughed at the irony. What could be more challenging than interviewing with the stranger you married yesterday? "I believe adaptability is my greatest strength," she answered instead, the words taking on new meaning as they left her lips. "I can navigate unexpected situations with composure and find solutions where others might only see problems." Something flickered in Mr. Ye's expression. Approval, perhaps, before his features settled back into their unreadable mask. When the interview concluded, Mr. Ye escorted her personally to the elevator, an unusual courtesy that didn't go unnoticed by the staff they passed. Female employees paused in their tasks, watching with undisguised curiosity as the notoriously aloof CEO walked side by side with an interview candidate. The position of personal assistant requires discretion and exceptional judgment, Mr. Ye stated quietly as they walked. The subtext in his words was unmistakable. Someone who understands that professional and personal boundaries must remain absolutely clear. Charan nodded slightly, understanding the implicit agreement being proposed. "I value professionalism above all else," she replied, matching his measured tone. "Personal matters never interfere with my work." At the elevator, he extended his hand formally. When she took it, his grip tightened almost imperceptibly. "We'll be in touch very soon, Ms. Lin." The doors closed between them, leaving Charan alone with her racing thoughts. She received the job offer by email that evening. The salary was higher than the position typically commanded, enough to cover her mother's treatments and still keep a roof over their heads. Charan stared at the figure, understanding the impossible choice before her. Taking this job meant facing Mr. Ye every day, maintaining an elaborate charade, and navigating the minefield of their secret connection. Refusing meant watching her mother suffer without proper care. There was no choice at all. Her first day arrived with crushing inevitability. Charan stepped into the executive floor with her heart in her throat, nodding politely to curious coworkers. She could feel their speculative gazes following her as she was shown to the desk outside Mr. Ye's office. Already, whispers trailed in her wake. The new assistant was unusually young, surprisingly inexperienced for such a coveted position. The implications in their tones made her cheeks burn. "Mr. Ye rarely hires assistants directly," one woman commented as she showed Charan the filing system. "He must have seen something special in you during your interview." The knowing look that accompanied this observation made Charan's stomach twist. If they only knew the truth, that her position had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with an impossible coincidence that had entangled their lives. Mr. Ye himself maintained a careful distance, communicating mostly through emails and brief businesslike interactions. When they were forced to meet in person, he kept his office door open, speaking just loudly enough for others to hear their strictly professional exchanges. Yet, sometimes, when handing her documents or receiving reports, their fingers would brush, and a current of uncomfortable awareness would pass between them. 2 weeks into her new position, Charan was summoned to his office after hours. The floor was deserted, most employees having departed for the evening. Mr. Ye stood by the window, silhouetted against the city lights. "We need to discuss our situation," he said without preamble when she entered. "This arrangement is becoming complicated." Charan stiffened. "I can resign, if that would make things easier." "That's not what I meant." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You're an excellent assistant. The work isn't the issue." "Then what is?" Mr. Ye hesitated, something he rarely did in business matters. "People are talking, speculating about why I hired you so quickly." Charan nodded, unsurprised. "I've noticed we need rules," he said finally. "Boundaries that will help us navigate this unusual circumstance." They established their guidelines then. No personal conversations at work, no acknowledgement of their legal connection, and an agreement to maintain absolute professionalism at all times. The marriage would remain their secret until her mother recovered or passed, after which they would quietly divorce as originally planned. As Charan left his office that night, she felt the weight of her decision settling more firmly on her shoulders. She could handle this, had to handle this, for her mother's sake. What she didn't notice were the narrowed eyes watching from the shadows of a nearby cubicle, or the silhouette of a woman who had stayed late specifically to observe the private meeting between the CEO and his new assistant. The shadow lurking behind that cubicle belonged to Liu Qing, marketing director, and the undisputed queen of Ye Group's social hierarchy. At 32, she commanded attention with her tailored designer suits and the confident stride of someone born into privilege. Unlike Charan's modest background, Liu Qing came from one of Shanghai's most influential families. Her father, a real estate tycoon with connections throughout Asia's business elite. Her career trajectory had been nothing short of meteoric, graduating from an elite business school abroad, then climbing through the corporate ranks with calculated precision until securing her position directly below Mr. Ye in the company's power structure. The morning after witnessing Charan's private meeting with the CEO, Liu Qing made her first move. As Charan hurried toward the conference room, arms loaded with meticulously prepared reports for the quarterly review, Liu Qing rounded the corner with a steaming cup of coffee. Their collision seemed entirely accidental to anyone watching, a simple workplace mishap. But the slight curl of satisfaction on Liu Qing's lips as the dark liquid cascaded over Charan's documents revealed the truth. "Oh, I'm so terribly sorry," Liu Qing exclaimed, her voice pitched perfectly to draw attention from nearby colleagues. "How clumsy of me. Let me help you clean this up." She made a show of dabbing ineffectively at the soaked papers while whispering, "First week, and already such a mess. I wonder what Mr. Ye will think about your preparation." Charan scrambled to salvage what she could, painfully aware of the crucial meeting starting in just 15 minutes. What struck her wasn't just the incident itself, but the strange disconnect between Liu Qing's apologetic words and the cold calculation in her eyes, like a predator assessing its prey. This wasn't just office politics. This felt personal somehow. The contrast between Liu Qing's public and private personas was masterfully maintained. In meetings, she offered Charan encouraging smiles and supportive nods. During presentations, she complimented Charan's ideas with seemingly genuine enthusiasm. Yet those who worked closely with Liu Qing noticed how her eyes hardened whenever Charan spoke directly to Mr. Ye, how her manicured nails dug into her palms when the CEO occasionally praised his new assistant's work. "You know, the marketing team has a betting pool on how long this one will last," whispered Wang Min, an account executive who'd worked at Ye Group for 5 years. "Liu Qing has outlasted 3 of Ye's previous assistants. Some say she's gunning for more than just a professional relationship with the boss." What Charan didn't know, couldn't have known, was the extent of Liu Qing's 3-year campaign to become Mrs. Ye. It had begun as a strategic career move. Securing the CEO's interest would cement her position in the company. But over time, it had transformed into something more obsessive. Liu Qing had studied his preferences meticulously, ordering the same rare single malt scotch he favored. Coincidentally, reading business biographies he mentioned in passing, even subtly adopting his preference for traditional Chinese medicine over Western pharmaceuticals. She'd positioned herself as his intellectual equal in boardroom discussions and his natural complement at company functions. When his mother visited the office, Liu Qing had presented her with a specially commissioned tea set from the elder woman's hometown, a gift that had taken months of research to perfect. Every interaction had been choreographed, every conversational topic researched. For 3 years, she had been painting a portrait of herself as the obvious choice for a man of his position and background. Then, Charan had appeared, young, inexperienced, from a modest background, and somehow commanded more of Mr. Ye's attention in 2 weeks than Liu Qing had managed to secure in 3 years. "She leaves his office looking flustered, and he actually smiled afterward," reported Zhao Wei, Liu Qing's loyal assistant, who had strategically befriended the receptionist outside Mr. Ye's office. And yesterday, he actually walked her to the elevator, instead of just dismissing her from his office. Liu Qing had cultivated an extensive network of informants throughout the company's 18 floors. The security guard who monitored the parking garage reported when Mr. Ye and Charan left within minutes of each other. The IT specialist noted when Mr. Ye accessed Charan's personnel file multiple times. The catering staff whispered about how the CEO had specifically requested Charan's dietary preferences be accommodated during the upcoming client dinner. These reports formed a disturbing pattern that Liu Qing couldn't ignore. Mr. Ye had always maintained professional distance with his staff, particularly his assistants. He'd never before shown interest in an employee's personal comfort or extended working sessions beyond strictly necessary business hours. Yet with Charan, subtle changes in his behavior suggested something unprecedented was developing. "Did you see how he actually laughed at something she said in the budget meeting?" Liu Qing demanded of her assistant. "In 5 years, I've never seen him do more than smile politely at a joke." The growing evidence pushed Liu Qing toward more direct action. 3 weeks into Charan's employment, she orchestrated what appeared to be a friendly lunch invitation. "We've hardly had a chance to properly welcome you," Liu Qing announced, stopping by Chiran's desk with a group of mid-level managers. Join us for lunch? It's a little tradition we have for new team members. At the upscale restaurant near the office, Liu Qing strategically seated Chiran between herself and Zhang Tao, the company's most notorious gossip. What started as casual conversation gradually transformed into a subtle interrogation about Chiran's background. So, which university did you attend again? Liu Qing asked, though she'd already memorized Chiran's entire resume. Not familiar with that one. Is it accredited? The slight pause before the final word landed like a slap. Several colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances. And your previous position was at? Liu Qing continued, each question designed to highlight Chiran's comparatively modest credentials. How interesting that Mr. Ye would see potential in someone with such a diverse background. He usually prefers candidates from top-tier institutions. Chiran maintained her composure, answering each question with dignity, despite the growing tension at the table. But Liu Qing had achieved her objective, planting seeds of doubt about Chiran's qualifications, and suggesting there must be another reason for her rapid hiring and the CEO's apparent interest. Back at the office, Liu Qing closed her office door and pulled up Chiran's personnel file one more time. Technically a breach of company protocol, but her IT allies had ensured no digital footprints would remain. Something wasn't adding up. The gap on Chiran's resume the week before she joined Ye Group, the conspicuous absence of social media profiles, the way Mr. Ye had personally overseen her hiring instead of delegating it to HR as usual. There's a connection I'm missing, Liu Qing muttered, staring at the photograph attached to Chiran's application. No one gets this close to him this quickly. No one. That evening, Liu Qing made a decision. This unexpected obstacle required more than passive-aggressive coffee spills or humiliating lunch conversations. If Chiran had somehow managed to forge a personal connection with Mr. Ye, then Liu Qing would need to attack on both professional and personal fronts. 3 years of careful positioning would not be undone by this newcomer. Within corporate hallways, a person's reputation can be their most valuable currency and their greatest vulnerability. What Chiran had built through late nights and meticulous attention to detail was about to face an assault more sophisticated than simple office politics. As she walked through the office one morning, the sudden silence that fell over the accounting department when she entered should have been her first warning. Conversations halted mid-sentence, eyes darted away from her gaze, and the usual morning greetings were replaced with terse nods. Something had shifted overnight, though Chiran wouldn't understand what until it was already taking root. The whispers began as almost imperceptible ripples in the social fabric of Ye Group. A raised eyebrow during a meeting. A colleague who suddenly had other plans when Chiran suggested lunch. The administrative assistant, who had been friendly just yesterday, now delivered documents to her desk without making eye contact. It wasn't until Chiran overheard a fragment of conversation in the break room, "I heard she didn't even have an actual interview," that the pieces started falling into place. By week's end, the rumors had crystallized into a narrative so effective precisely because it contained a grain of truth wrapped in toxic lies. Yes, Chiran had been hired quickly. Yes, she lacked the prestigious education of her colleagues. But the whispered explanation that she had secured her position through inappropriate means with the CEO was spreading through departments like a virus, infecting every interaction. The particularly cruel irony was that their fake marriage remained a complete secret, while a fictional affair became common knowledge. Did you notice how her desk is the only one with a direct line of sight to Mr. Ye's office? One colleague whispered to another as Chiran approached the copier. They didn't bother lowering their voices. Convenient for sending signals, I guess. Their laughter followed her back to her desk, where she found herself smoothing her conservative blouse with trembling hands. Suddenly, self-conscious about clothing she'd never given a second thought to before. The isolation grew more pronounced with each passing day. The once collaborative team meetings became exercises in exclusion, with Chiran's suggestions met with polite dismissal or outright silence. In the company cafeteria, tables that once welcomed her now filled strategically with bags and coats just as she approached with her tray. She began eating lunch, alone at her desk, telling herself it gave her more time to work. ignoring how her appetite had diminished under the weight of unspoken accusations. Behind this orchestrated social death was Liu Qing's masterful hand. Her method was elegant in its simplicity. She never made direct accusations herself. Instead, she planted seeds with carefully chosen conduits. "I'm just concerned about the team dynamics," she confided to the HR manager over coffee. "Several people have mentioned feeling uncomfortable with how quickly Chiran gained Mr. Ye's trust. I wanted to check if there's a mentorship protocol we should be following." The innocent expression on her face revealed nothing of her intentions, as she added, "I'm only thinking of protecting everyone involved, including Chiran." To the executive team, Liu Qing expressed worries about perception issues that might affect client relationships. To Chiran's immediate colleagues, she offered sympathetic glances and vague comments about merit-based advancement. Each conversation added another layer to the narrative, until the rumor gained a life independent of its creator. Liu Qing could now stand back and watch her handiwork unfold without leaving fingerprints. The psychological toll manifested in subtle ways at first. Chiran began double-checking work she would have confidently submitted before. She arrived earlier, stayed later, hoping that sheer productivity would somehow counteract the whispers. Her presentations became exhaustively detailed, as though perfect data could shield her from personal attacks. But the harder she worked, the more it seemed to confirm suspicions. Why else would someone exert such effort unless compensating for undeserved advancement? "It's sad, really," Chiran overheard one afternoon as she returned from the restroom. Two colleagues from marketing stood just around the corner, unaware of her presence. "I actually thought she was competent at first. Turns out, she just slept her way into the CEO's office." The casual cruelty of the statement froze Chiran in place. "Well, you know what they say. Lie down for the job, and you'll always be seen on your back." Their laughter physically struck her, as tangible as a slap. In that moment, something within Chiran hardened. The relentless work to prove herself, the attempts to win approval through competence, none of it had mattered against the power of a malicious narrative. Workplace rumors were destroying what she had rightfully earned, and the anxiety that had been building transformed into something unexpected: resolve. The next morning, she walked directly to the marketing department. The two voices from yesterday's conversation belonged to Emma Chen and Jiaxin Wang, both members of Liu Qing's trusted circle. They fell silent when Chiran approached their desks, exchanging nervous glances as she stood before them, posture perfectly straight. "I believe we need to clear the air," Chiran said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Yesterday you discussed certain theories about my employment here. Since you seem so invested in my career path, perhaps you'd prefer to ask me directly rather than speculate behind my back." The shocked silence that followed gave Chiran a moment's satisfaction. Emma recovered first, her face flushing. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Chiran replied, keeping her voice low but unwavering. "And while I normally wouldn't dignify such accusations with a response, I want to make something clear. I earned my position through my qualifications and work ethic. Every project I've completed, every presentation I've delivered, these speak for themselves. And if you have specific concerns about my performance, I welcome professional feedback through appropriate channels." Jiaxin at least had the decency to look ashamed, while Emma's expression hardened into hostility. But it was the crowd of onlookers that truly mattered. Colleagues who had been absorbing rumors for days now witnessed Chiran's dignified defense. She hadn't screamed or threatened. She had simply stood her ground with unexpected strength. What none of them noticed was Liu Qing watching from the doorway of the department, her carefully composed expression barely concealing her surprise. The quiet, accommodating assistant she had dismissed as an easy target had shown a backbone of steel. This would require recalculation. The confrontation didn't end the rumors. Nothing so deeply rooted could be eliminated in a single moment, but it altered their trajectory. When Chiran entered the break room the following day, conversations no longer stopped abruptly. A few colleagues even offered tentative smiles. It wasn't vindication, but it was a first step toward reclaiming her professional identity. Liu Qing, however, was far from deterred. That evening, As the office emptied, she remained at her desk, scrolling through company files with renewed purpose. If professional isolation hadn't broken Charan, perhaps a more direct approach would be necessary. Charan had demonstrated unexpected resilience against social attacks, but everyone had vulnerabilities in their professional capabilities. Liu Qing's smile grew cold as she accessed the upcoming client presentation schedule. The battlefield would simply shift from reputation to performance, where failures would be visible to everyone, including Mr. Ye himself. Digital sabotage leaves few fingerprints, but creates devastating impact, especially when orchestrated by someone who knows exactly which files to corrupt. As Charan arrived at work that Monday morning, she found an urgent email from Mr. Ye requesting her to present the Gentech proposal in his place, as he would be delayed due to an emergency board meeting. Her stomach tightened as she stared at the screen. This wasn't just any client. Gentech represented a potential 8-figure contract that could reshape the company's quarterly projections. The presentation file had been meticulously prepared by Mr. Ye himself, with Charan contributing research and formatting over the past 2 weeks. All she needed to do was deliver it confidently. Simple enough. She opened the file for a final review, scanning through familiar slides until slide 18 caught her attention. The profit margin projections were completely wrong, showing 5% instead of the carefully calculated 15% that made the partnership appealing. Her heart began racing as she clicked through more slides, discovering critical data missing from the competitive analysis and embarrassing typos in the executive summary that transformed professional language into something bordering on nonsensical. "This isn't possible," Charan whispered, checking the modification timestamp. The file had been altered at 7:42 that morning, nearly an hour before she arrived. She glanced at the clock. The Gentech executives would be arriving in 23 minutes. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she frantically began reconstructing the presentation from backup files and her own notes. From across the open workspace, Liu Qing observed Charan's growing panic with a cup of jasmine tea poised at her lips, satisfaction warming her more than the beverage ever could. She'd arrived particularly early that morning, having learned of Mr. Ye's emergency meeting from her network of informants. 20 minutes of uninterrupted access to Charan's computer had been more than enough time. "Is everything all right, Charan?" Liu Qing asked, approaching with perfectly feigned concern. "You look rather stressed. The Gentech meeting is quite important. I hope there aren't any issues with the presentation." Charan looked up, her expression carefully controlled, despite the chaos erupting inside her. "Everything's fine, Liu Qing. Just making some last-minute improvements." "Well, if you need any help." Liu Qing let the offer hang in the air, knowing full well Charan had neither the time to accept nor the ability to fix everything before the meeting. When the Gentech delegation arrived, 3 executives in impeccable suits, with expressions that suggested they valued their time in financial increments, Charan ushered them into the conference room with a professional smile that masked her desperation. She had managed to correct the most glaring errors, but several slides still contained inconsistencies she hadn't had time to address. The presentation began smoothly enough. Charan delivered the introduction with practiced ease. But as she progressed to the financial projections, the inconsistencies became impossible to ignore. The CFO of Gentech interrupted, his brow furrowed. "These profit margins don't align with what we discussed in preliminary meetings," he stated, tapping his tablet. "Are you suggesting the potential return has decreased by 2/3? Charan felt heat rising in her face. "There appears to be an error in that slide. The correct projection is, and this competitive analysis is missing several key market players," the CEO interjected, his patience visibly thinning. "Is Ye Group not taking this partnership seriously?" As Charan struggled to explain, the conference room door opened. Mr. Ye entered with smooth, confident strides, his expression revealing nothing as he assessed the situation with a single glance. "Gentlemen, please accept my apologies for the delay," he said, moving to stand beside Charan. "I see we're experiencing some technical difficulties with our presentation. Perhaps you'll allow me to continue while my assistant resolves these issues." Without missing a beat, Mr. Ye launched into a comprehensive overview of the partnership proposal, citing figures and projections from memory with such precision that the Gentech executives soon forgot their irritation. Chiran slipped into a chair at the corner of the room, professional composure maintained despite the crushing weight of embarrassment pressing against her chest. When the meeting concluded an hour later, with handshakes and tentative commitments to move forward, Chiran felt simultaneously relieved and devastated. The client had been satisfied, but her professional credibility had suffered a potentially fatal blow. "Ms. Feng, a moment please," Mr. Ye said, as the clients departed, his tone giving away nothing of his thoughts. When they were alone, his expression remained unreadable. "Would you care to explain what happened with the presentation?" "Someone tampered with the files, sir," Chiran said, maintaining eye contact despite her humiliation. "The version I reviewed yesterday was perfect, but this morning I found errors and missing sections. I tried to fix everything before the meeting, but there wasn't enough time." "And you have no idea who might have accessed your computer?" His question seemed oddly specific, almost as if he already suspected something. "I can't be certain," Chiran replied carefully, "but I arrived at 8:30, and the file was modified at 7:42, according to the system." Mr. Ye nodded thoughtfully. "I'll have it look into it. In the meantime, I suggest you be more cautious about securing your workstation when you're away from your desk." As Chiran left his office, she found Liu Qing waiting by her desk, sympathy expertly arranged on her features. "That looked painful," Liu Qing commented. "Technical difficulties can be so embarrassing, especially with important clients." Before Chiran could respond, Liu Qing continued, "I was just on my way to speak with Mr. Ye about our marketing strategy for Gentech, assuming they still want to work with us after today's performance." Chiran watched Liu Qing glide toward Mr. Ye's office, knowing exactly what would happen next. The marketing director would subtly plant doubts about Chiran's competence, suggesting perhaps someone with more experience should handle important client relationships. What Chiran couldn't see was Mr. Ye's reaction when Liu Qing delicately suggested that perhaps Chiran isn't quite ready for such responsibility. "That's an interesting perspective, Liu Qing," Mr. Ye responded, his voice neutral. "Your concern for the company's reputation is noted." What Liu Qing didn't know was that Mr. Ye had already reviewed the security footage, showing her entering the office at 7:30 that morning and going directly to Chiran's unattended computer. He had watched as she methodically opened files, made alterations, and carefully covered her tracks, but not carefully enough to erase the digital footprint that IT had already traced back to her credentials. Mr. Ye chose to keep this discovery to himself, simply thanking Liu Qing for her input and dismissing her with a practiced smile that revealed nothing of his thoughts. Strategic patience had always served him well in business negotiations, and he recognized this situation required the same measured approach. That evening, as the office emptied, Chiran sat alone at her desk, reconstructing the Gentech presentation to its original state. She didn't notice Mr. Ye approaching until his voice broke her concentration. "You should go home, Ms. Feng. Tomorrow is another day." She looked up, surprised by the almost gentle tone he rarely used. "I wanted to fix everything properly, sir. It won't happen again." "No," he agreed. "I don't believe it will." Something in his voice suggested a certainty that puzzled her, but she was too exhausted to analyze it further. The certainty in Mr. Ye's voice masked a decision he had already made, one that would surprise everyone at the Lotus Garden restaurant the following evening. As Chiran found herself seated beside Mr. Zhang, the CEO of Meridian Industries, she had no way of knowing that this carefully orchestrated business dinner would become the moment when professional boundaries and personal dignity would collide in ways none of them anticipated. Liu Qing's smile had been particularly satisfied when she finalized the seating arrangements. Mr. Zhang specifically requested to discuss the technology integration aspects, she had explained with practiced innocence, as she positioned Chiran beside the notorious executive. "Your detailed knowledge of the proposal will be invaluable." What she failed to mention was Mr. Zhang's reputation for testing personal boundaries with female employees, a fact well known among the company's upper management. The first hour passed pleasantly enough. Crystal glasses clinked against fine china as servers moved silently between tables draped in pristine white linen. Charan maintained her professional composure, answering questions about implementation timelines with precise clarity. From across the round table, Mr. Ye occasionally glanced in her direction, his expression characteristically unreadable as he discussed profit projections with other executives. It began subtly, a hand brushing against her knee as Mr. Zhang reached for his napkin. Charan shifted slightly, creating distance without drawing attention. The contract under discussion represented potentially millions in revenue. She understood the delicate balance required. When his hand returned moments later, resting heavily on her thigh, she felt her body tense while her face remained carefully neutral. "Your assistant is quite knowledgeable," Mr. Zhang commented to Mr. Ye, his fingers tracing small circles below the tablecloth. "Such young talent is refreshing to have around the office, I imagine." Across the table, Mr. Ye's eyes narrowed, almost imperceptibly. He'd been watching more closely than anyone realized, noting the slight stiffness in Charan's shoulders, the way her right hand had disappeared beneath the table to gently remove Mr. Zhang's unwanted touch. Her discomfort was evident to him in ways invisible to others. The tightness around her smile, the measured pauses before each response. "Perhaps we should discuss the security protocols," Charan suggested, attempting to redirect the conversation to safer territory, while discreetly moving Mr. Zhang's hand for the third time. "I'm more interested in after-hours collaboration," Mr. Zhang replied, his voice lowered for her alone as his hand slid higher. "Pretty girls like you must understand how business really gets done." A waiter appeared with the next course, and Charan used the momentary distraction to shift her chair slightly. The movement caught Liu Qing's attention, who misinterpreted Charan's discomfort as favorable progress for her plan. She raised her glass toward Mr. Zhang with an encouraging smile. "Our teams could finalize the details next week," Mr. Ye stated, his tone carrying through the ambient noise of the restaurant. "Though I believe there are still questions about compatibility." "Compatibility is rarely an issue with the right incentives," Mr. Zhang laughed, his hand returning to Charan's knee beneath the table. "Wouldn't you agree, Miss Sun?" The room seemed to constrict around Charan. Professional etiquette warred with personal dignity. Making a scene would jeopardize the contract, yet enduring such treatment felt increasingly impossible with each passing minute. Her fork trembled slightly as she set it down. "Miss Sun has exceptional standards," Mr. Ye replied before she could answer, "as does Ye Group." Something in his tone silenced the table. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. The temperature of the conversation had dropped several degrees. Mr. Zhang, missing these warning signs, continued. "Standards can be flexible in the right circumstances," he chuckled, squeezing Charan's thigh while addressing Mr. Ye. "Your assistant seems to understand that better than you. Perhaps she should handle more negotiations." Charan's knuckles whitened around her water glass. Across the table, she caught Mr. Ye's gaze, and was startled by what she found there. Behind his usual mask of indifference burned something she'd never witnessed: controlled fury. Without breaking eye contact with Charan, Mr. Ye slowly closed the contract folder before him. "I believe we've discussed enough for one evening." The other executives exchanged confused glances. They were barely halfway through dinner, and the contract remained unsigned. "We haven't finalized the terms," Mr. Zhang protested, finally removing his hand from Charan's leg to reach for his wine. "There will be no terms to finalize," Mr. Ye replied, his voice carrying a finality that silenced the table. "Ye Group will not be proceeding with this partnership." The statement landed like a physical blow. 8 figures worth of business, discarded in a single sentence. Liu Qing's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips, her expression flickering between shock and rising panic. "You can't be serious," she interjected. "We've been working on this deal for months." "I'm perfectly serious," Mr. Ye replied, as he stood, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision. "Miss Sun, shall we return to the office? There are other projects requiring our attention." Charan rose immediately, relief flooding through her as she gathered her portfolio. Around the table, executives exchanged bewildered glances, unable to process what had just occurred. This behavior from the famously calculated CEO defied all precedent. "This is absurd," Mr. Zhang sputtered, his face flushing. "Over what? A little harmless conversation?" Mr. Ye paused, his gaze cooling to something dangerous. "Your group values respect in all interactions. It appears our standards in this area are incompatible." With that, he gestured for Chiran to precede him toward the exit, leaving behind a table of stunned executives and one particularly furious marketing director. Liu Qing's eyes followed them with barely concealed rage as her carefully orchestrated humiliation of Chiran transformed into an unprecedented display of protection from the man she herself had pursued for years. The black company car waited at the curb, engine purring quietly in the evening air. Once inside, silence enveloped them as the driver pulled away from the restaurant. Chiran stared at her hands, suddenly uncertain what to say. The evening's events had shattered the careful professional distance they'd maintained. "Are you all right?" Mr. Ye asked after several minutes, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. The simple question, so human, so different from their usual transaction-based exchanges, caught her off guard. She looked up to find him watching her with genuine concern, his typical mask of indifference nowhere in sight. "Yes," she answered, then hesitated. "I'm sorry about the contract." "Don't be." His response was immediate, brooking no argument. No contract is worth someone's dignity. The simple declaration hung between them, reshaping the air in the car. This wasn't the cold, calculating CEO who had built an empire through ruthless business acumen. This was someone else entirely, someone who had just sacrificed millions without hesitation to protect her. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once, then turned toward the window. It was the only appropriate response. But they both recognized something had fundamentally changed. The lines they'd so carefully drawn between their arranged marriage and professional relationship had blurred. For the first time since their hasty ceremony, Chiran found herself truly looking at the man beside her, not as her boss, not as her convenient husband, but as someone whose actions suggested depths she'd never considered. The car pulled into the underground parking garage of Ye Tower. As they rode the elevator in silence, Chiran noticed Mr. Ye watching her reflection in the polished doors. "Will you be able to salvage anything from the Meridian deal?" she asked, returning to familiar professional territory. "That's not your concern tonight." His voice had regained its customary crispness, yet something in his eyes remained different. "Go home, Chiran. Tomorrow is soon enough to discuss next steps." As the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, he hesitated. "Will you be all right getting home?" The question, so mundane from anyone else, represented uncharted territory between them. She nodded, surprised by the gentle concern behind his inquiry. "No," he agreed, studying her face. "I don't believe it will." Something in his voice suggested a certainty that puzzled her, but she was too exhausted to analyze it further. While Mr. Ye had protected Chiran's dignity in public, her private world was already under silent attack. That evening, as she inserted her key into the lock of her modest apartment door, something felt instantly wrong. The door swung open with barely a touch, though she distinctly remembered double-checking the lock that morning, a habit ingrained from years of living alone in the city. Chiran froze in the doorway, heart hammering against her ribs as she scanned the seemingly undisturbed space before her. Nothing appeared obviously missing at first glance. Her laptop still sat on the coffee table, and the small television remained in its place. Yet as she moved cautiously through the rooms, the wrongness intensified. Her photo frames sat at slightly different angles. The drawer containing her mother's medical records stood partially open. Her neatly organized bills had been shuffled. Someone had been here, moving through her most intimate spaces with deliberate purpose, touching her belongings with invasive hands. "Hello," she called out, knowing the intruder was long gone but needing to break the oppressive silence. Her voice sounded small and fragile in the empty apartment. Chiran sank onto the edge of her sofa, suddenly feeling the weight of vulnerability pressing down on her shoulders. This violation wasn't about theft, it was about information, about her. The realization sent a chill racing down her spine. Morning brought no relief from the unease that had settled into her bones. Chiran arrived at the office with dark circles beneath her eyes, having spent the night cataloging every item in her apartment, trying to determine what the intruder might have been seeking. Mr. Ye noticed immediately, his gaze lingering on her face, with something that might have been concern in anyone else, but she averted her eyes and dove into work, desperate for the distraction. "Your mother's rheumatoid arthritis, such a difficult condition to manage," Liu Qing commented casually 3 days later, stopping by Chiran's desk with a deceptively sympathetic smile. "The new biological treatments are promising, but so expensive without premium insurance, aren't they?" Chiran's fingers froze over her keyboard. She had never mentioned her mother's specific diagnosis to anyone at the company, not even in her emergency contact information. The medical records in her apartment drawer suddenly took on new significance. "How did you know about my mother's condition?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Liu Qing's smile never faltered. "Oh, I think you mentioned it during our lunch. I have an excellent memory for personal details. It helps in marketing." Her eyes remained fixed on Chiran's face, studying her reaction with barely concealed satisfaction before gliding away. By the end of the week, Chiran noticed the whispers had evolved. No longer were colleagues simply speculating about her qualifications. Now they seemed to know intimate details about her life. Someone mentioned her mother's hospitalization last year. Another referenced the small town where she grew up. Each comment, seemingly innocent, built upon the last until Chiran felt completely exposed, as though her personal history had become common knowledge. The feeling of invasion followed her everywhere. At night, she found herself checking behind shower curtains and under beds, jumping at ordinary sounds from neighboring apartments. Sleep became a luxury she could rarely afford, as her mind replayed the violation over and over. Who had been in her home? What were they looking for? The questions circled relentlessly, offering no answers. "You should really consider a better address," Liu Qing remarked loudly enough for nearby colleagues to hear as they passed. In the hallway, "Some neighborhoods in this city just aren't safe anymore. I heard there's been a rash of break-ins recently." The knowing glint in her eyes left no doubt about her meaning. That evening, Chiran tore through her apartment with newfound determination, methodically examining every drawer, every file. It was when she reached for the folder containing her essential documents that panic truly set in. Her marriage certificate, the evidence of her hasty union with Mr. Ye, had been moved from its position. Though still in the folder, it now sat on top, rather than beneath her birth certificate, where she had carefully hidden it. Someone knew. Someone had discovered the dangerous secret that could destroy not only her reputation, but potentially Mr. Ye's as well. The realization sent her collapsing onto the floor, gasping for breath as the full implications washed over her. This wasn't just about humiliating her anymore. This was ammunition for destruction. In the company bathroom the next day, Liu Qing cornered her while she was washing her hands. "Marriage is such a sacred institution, don't you think?" she asked, reapplying her lipstick with meticulous precision. "Such a shame when people enter into it for the wrong reasons." Her eyes met Chiran's in the mirror, cold and calculating. "It's almost like fraud, using marriage as a stepping stone for personal gain." Chiran's hands trembled as she dried them. "I suppose people might see it that way if they didn't know the full story," she managed to reply, her voice steadier than she felt. Liu Qing's laugh was brittle. "Oh, stories can be so complicated, can't they? But documents tend to speak for themselves. Dates especially can tell quite a tale." The implied threat hung in the air between them, undisguised now. Chiran held Liu Qing's gaze for one long moment before straightening her shoulders and walking out, refusing to give her the satisfaction of visible distress. But inside, fear clawed at her throat. If Liu Qing had indeed discovered the marriage certificate and its damning date, just one day before her interview, the carefully constructed professional relationship she and Mr. Ye had maintained would collapse instantly. That night, instead of cowering, Chiran channeled her fear into action. She researched security systems, comparing features and prices, until she found one she could afford with her next paycheck. The next evening, she installed compact cameras at strategic points throughout her apartment, positioning them to capture any intruder who might return. She changed her locks, reinforced her windows, and moved her important documents to a small safe she purchased secondhand. "Let them come back," she whispered to her empty apartment, a newfound steel in her voice. "Next time, I'll be ready." As days passed with no further break-ins, Charan began bringing important documents to work, storing them in a locked drawer of her desk, rather than risking leaving them at home. She started varying her route home each evening, watching carefully for anyone who might be following her. The constant vigilance was exhausting, but the alternative, remaining helpless, was unthinkable. Liu Qing's subtle warfare continued, dropping references to Charan's personal life in meetings and casual conversations. "How's your mother doing with that new medication?" she would ask in front of others. Or, "Have you found a more secure apartment yet?" Each question drove home the message, "I know everything about you. I can reach you anywhere." What Liu Qing hadn't anticipated was how the invasion would transform Charan. Where there had been fear, a quiet resilience now grew. The violation of her private space had stripped away something essential, her sense of security, but in its place emerged a determination that surprised even Charan herself. She began documenting every unusual interaction, every implied threat, building her own case methodically and discreetly. The company-wide email announcing the annual team-building event appeared innocuous on Charan's screen. This year's theme: a murder mystery party at the Hawthorne Estate, a sprawling property nestled in the hills 30 miles outside the city. What caught her attention wasn't the elaborate invitation designed with fake bloodstains and vintage detective imagery, but the name listed as the event organizer, Liu Qing. Something about the timing sent a chill through Charan's body. Just as she'd been fortifying her defenses at home, a new battlefield was being prepared. At the next morning's planning committee meeting, Liu Qing's smile never reached her eyes as she distributed character assignments. "And Charan," she announced with theatrical flair, "you'll be playing our victim, Eliza Montgomery. Tragic, really. Murdered in the abandoned greenhouse just before revealing a devastating secret." The assembled colleagues chuckled at the dramatic description, unaware of the weight behind Liu Qing's words. When Charan tentatively suggested another role might better suit her, Liu Qing's response came with razor-sharp sweetness. "But you're perfect for this part." Mr. Ye specifically approved all character assignments. The following weeks brought elaborate costume fittings and script revisions, each change somehow increasing Charan's isolation during the planned event. The victim's death scene, originally written to occur in the main house surrounded by witnesses, shifted to the secluded greenhouse at the property's edge. Liu Qing insisted on authenticity. The victim should die alone, discovered later by the other players. "It builds suspense," she explained to the planning committee, never taking her eyes off Charan. Preparation for the event consumed the office. Liu Qing demonstrated unusual dedication, personally handling everything from catering arrangements to transportation logistics. While other employees expressed excitement, Charan found herself cataloging concerning details: the remote location with spotty cell service, the elaborate schedule ensuring she would be alone during a specific 30-minute window, and Liu Qing's insistence on personally handling all the prop weapons for safety reasons. 2 days before the event, Charan stood alone in the copy room when Liu Qing appeared suddenly in the doorway. "I dropped by the estate yesterday for a final walkthrough," she said, leaning against the doorframe and effectively blocking the exit. "The greenhouse is perfect, so isolated you could scream, and no one would hear you over the party music. Perfect for our little murder scene, don't you think?" She left without waiting for a response, leaving Charan gripping the edge of the copy machine to steady herself. The evening of the event arrived with ominous storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Employees boarded chartered buses in high spirits, discussing their characters and potential strategies. Charan found herself seated alone at the back of the second bus, watching raindrops begin to spatter against the windows as the cityscape gave way to winding country roads. Her phone vibrated with a text message from Mr. Ye. "Can't attend tonight. Emergency board meeting. Stay alert." The last 2 words seemed oddly pointed, almost a warning. The Hawthorne Estate emerged from the gathering darkness like something from a Victorian ghost story. A massive stone mansion with elaborate gardens, now slick with rain. Inside, costumed colleagues sipped themed cocktails, while Liu Qing, resplendent in a 1920s flapper dress, distributed final character instructions. "Remember everyone. Stay in character no matter what happens." That's what makes these events fun, the commitment to the fantasy. As the scripted events unfolded, Chiran felt increasingly uneasy. Several times she noticed Liu Qing watching her with unusual intensity from across crowded rooms. The elaborate dinner scene concluded, and according to the script, it was time for Chiran's character to excuse herself and head to the greenhouse to meet a mysterious informant, actually setting the stage for her murder discovery 30 minutes later. Rain hammered against the glass panels of the connecting walkway as Chiran reluctantly made her way toward the greenhouse. The property's landscaping lights cast eerie shadows across the garden path. Stepping inside the humid structure, she found it filled with exotic plants and antique gardening equipment. According to the script, she was to wait 5 minutes, then position herself artistically by the orchid display for maximum dramatic effect when her body was discovered. The greenhouse door clicked shut behind her, with unexpected finality. Through the fogged glass, she could make out a figure approaching, Liu Qing, moving with deliberate purpose, rather than the affected theatrical gait everyone had been using for their characters. Something metallic gleamed in her hand, catching the sporadic flashes of lightning from outside. "You know what fascinates me about murder mysteries?" Liu Qing called out as she entered, her voice eerily calm. "How often reality imitates art. All these people inside, playing a game, while out here," she raised her hand, revealing not the rubber prop knife Chiran expected, but a very real kitchen knife with a gleaming edge. "Out here, we're writing our own ending." Chiran backed away, her heart pounding. "Liu Qing, what are you doing? This isn't part of the game, isn't it? The jealous rival eliminating her competition? Seems perfectly on script to me." Lightning flashed, illuminating Liu Qing's face, all pretense of professional composure gone, replaced by something feral and desperate. 3 years I've worked to position myself in his life. 3 years of careful planning, of learning everything about him, of making myself indispensable. Then you appear from nowhere, with nothing to offer, and suddenly he's protecting you, defending you, watching you, when he thinks no one notices. Chiran calculated the distance to the door, searching for anything to use as a shield. "This is insane. You could lose everything over a man who's never shown interest in you." "He would have chosen me." Liu Qing's voice rose sharply. "If you hadn't interfered, he would have seen we're perfectly matched. I'm not some desperate girl who needed to trap him into an arrangement." The knife wavered in her hand. "Yes, I know about your little marriage certificate. Found that, quite by accident during my visit to your apartment. Imagine my surprise." Chiran's mind raced. How had Liu Qing known the greenhouse would be empty at this exact moment? The realization hit her. Everyone was following Liu Qing's carefully crafted script, ensuring no interruptions. The murder wasn't scheduled to be discovered for another 20 minutes. By then, "You'll never get away with this," Chiran said, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "People know we're both out here." Liu Qing laughed, the sound unnervingly brittle. "A tragic accident during our game. The unstable assistant, recently under scrutiny for unethical hiring practices, suffered a breakdown during our team-building event. In her confusion, she fell on an actual knife she'd brought to make her role more authentic. Such a shame. Mr. Ye will need someone to comfort him afterward." As Liu Qing advanced, Chiran grabbed a heavy terracotta pot from a nearby shelf and hurled it toward her attacker. The distraction bought her precious seconds as she darted between plant displays, but the greenhouse offered limited hiding places. She found herself cornered among overgrown ferns, the exit blocked by Liu Qing's advancing figure. "I've sacrificed too much to let you ruin everything," Liu Qing hissed, raising the knife. "Do you have any idea what it's like to want someone so desperately while watching them notice everyone but you?" The greenhouse door burst open with sudden force. Mr. Ye stood framed in the doorway, rain-soaked and breathing heavily. His eyes moved from the knife in Liu Qing's hand to Chiran's terrified expression, comprehension dawning instantly. "Liu Qing, put the knife down, now." Liu Qing froze, her expression cycling through shock, embarrassment, and finally, a strange calm. "You came for her. Of course you did. You always notice when she's in trouble." She lowered the knife slightly, turning toward him. "I would have given you everything. Why wasn't that enough?" The knife clattered to the floor, but the danger had only transformed, rather than disappeared. In its place grew something far more terrifying for Charan, the inevitable conversation waiting in Mr. Ye's office, where secrets couldn't hide behind professional courtesies any longer. The security team arrived within minutes of Mr. Ye's call, their efficiency a testament to the resources at his disposal. 2 guards escorted Liu Qing from the premises, her face a vacant mask as she walked past the confused party guests, while Charan stood trembling in the greenhouse, arms wrapped around herself, as if the warmth of her own embrace could stop the shaking. "You need to see a doctor," Mr. Ye said, his voice softer than Charan had ever heard it before. When she shook her head, insisting she was physically unharmed, he didn't press the issue. Instead, he removed his suit jacket and placed it around her shoulders without commentary, the gesture so automatic it seemed to surprise him as much as her. The drive back to the city passed in weighted silence. Mr. Ye instructed his driver to take them to the office rather than home, a decision Charan didn't question. She stared out of the window, watching the countryside blur into cityscape, her thoughts scattered and sharp like the glass fragments of the greenhouse panels. The office building stood eerily empty at this late hour, their footsteps echoing through the vacant lobby as they made their way to the elevator. Inside his office, Mr. Ye poured 2 fingers of whiskey into crystal tumblers, handing one to Charan. "For shock," he explained simply. She accepted the glass but didn't drink, finding the amber liquid too much like the malice she'd seen in Liu Qing's eyes. "Why you?" he asked finally, standing by the window rather than taking his usual position behind the desk. Liu Qing has always been ambitious, perhaps obsessive, but never violent. What did she discover that pushed her to this? The question hung between them, like an invisible thread, pulling at the carefully constructed facade they'd maintained for months. Charan's fingers tightened around the glass, and she realized with sudden clarity that tonight had permanently altered whatever delicate balance they'd established. "She found our marriage certificate," Charan said, quietly, the words sending a ripple through the still air of the office. "When she broke into my apartment." Mr. Ye didn't appear surprised by this revelation. He simply nodded once, as if confirming a theory he'd already developed. "I've suspected, since the second break-in, that she'd found something significant." Her behavior became more targeted, more personal. He took a deliberate sip of his whiskey before continuing. "What I don't understand is why you never told me she was escalating to this degree." Charan looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Would you have believed me? The marketing director, with impeccable credentials, versus the assistant hired under questionable circumstances." "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "I would have believed you because I've been gathering evidence against Liu Qing for weeks." This admission stunned Charan into momentary silence. "Evidence?" Mr. Ye set down his glass and retrieved a tablet from his desk drawer. "After the Gen Tech presentation, I had IT security monitoring all unusual system activity. Liu Qing's digital footprint is extensive. Emails threatening former employees who crossed her, unauthorized access to personnel files, manipulation of project data to sabotage colleagues who threatened her position." He scrolled through documents as he spoke. "Then there's the security footage from your apartment building, showing her entering with a copied key. I was building a case for her termination when she accelerated her timeline tonight." "You knew all this time?" Charan felt a complex mixture of relief and betrayal wash over her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "The same reason you didn't tell me about the marriage certificate, I imagine," he replied. "Professional boundaries." The irony of those words, the very phrase they'd used to define their unusual relationship, hung in the air between them. For the first time since their hasty ceremony, Charan allowed herself to truly look at the man she had legally married. Not as her boss, not as the intimidating CEO, but as someone who had potentially saved her life tonight. "I never expected you to hire me," she admitted. "When I saw you in that interview room, I nearly turned around and left. I thought you were honoring our agreement by ignoring our connection." A faint smile touched Mr. Ye's lips. "I recognized you immediately. I could have assigned you to any department, any position far from my office. Instead, I made you my assistant." "Why?" The question escaped before she could contain it. "Curiosity, at first," he answered with unexpected candor. I wanted to understand the kind of woman who would marry a stranger to fulfill her mother's wish, then work as if that marriage didn't exist. Your resume showed competence, but your actions showed character. His words cracked something in Charan's carefully maintained composure. Months of enduring Liu Qing's escalating harassment, the isolation, the constant vigilance, it all came rushing to the surface. Do you know what it's been like? Coming to work every day, wondering what new humiliation was waiting, checking my apartment each night for signs of intrusion, never knowing who I could trust? Her voice broke, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I've been so afraid, but I couldn't show it, because that would make me vulnerable, more vulnerable than I already was. The trauma bond formed through shared danger manifested in Mr. Ye's unexpected response. He closed the distance between them, kneeling beside her chair rather than summoning her to his position, a complete inversion of their established power dynamic. I know, he said softly. I've watched you fight battles I didn't fully understand until tonight. Without thinking, Charan reached out, her fingers lightly touching his hand. The contact was brief but electric, sending an unmistakable current through both of them. In that moment, the psychological impact of their shared traumatic experience crystallized into something neither had anticipated, a genuine connection that transcended their arranged circumstance. What happens now? Charan asked, withdrawing her hand slowly. Mr. Ye rose and returned to the window, his silhouette framed against the city lights. Legally, Liu Qing will face consequences. The company will file charges for attempted assault, corporate espionage, and harassment. She'll never work in this industry again. He turned back to face Charan. As for us, that's a more complex question. The workplace relationship that had begun as a professional arrangement now stood at a crossroads. All the months of carefully maintained distance had been collapsed by a single act of violence, forcing them to acknowledge what had been gradually developing beneath the surface. Our arrangement was never meant to be permanent, Charan said carefully. Once my mother recovered, we agreed to dissolve it quietly. And is that still what you want? His question carried a weight that hadn't been there before, each word measured and deliberate. Charan considered the question with the same thoughtfulness with which it had been asked. I think I'm no longer certain. Tonight changed something. Yes, he agreed simply. It did. They sat in silence for several moments, neither rushing to define what existed between them. Unlike their hasty marriage, this moment demanded patience, a careful consideration of possibilities neither had allowed themselves to contemplate before. Perhaps, Mr. Ye finally suggested, we could start by acknowledging what we actually are to each other now, not what circumstance initially made us. Charan nodded slowly. Colleagues who shared a life-threatening experience. She paused, then added more softly, friends, possibly, and legally married, though we've never explored what that might mean beyond paperwork. The tentative smile they shared held more genuine warmth than any interaction they'd had since meeting. Neither moved to close the physical distance between them, understanding instinctively that this fragile new connection required space to develop naturally. That fragile moment of connection between Charan and Mr. Ye marked the calm before an unprecedented storm. Within 24 hours, every employee at Ye Group would receive an email containing their marriage certificate, igniting a firestorm of speculation that threatened everything they'd built, both professionally and personally. The question wasn't whether they could weather Liu Qing's revenge, but whether their newfound trust could survive being thrust into the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny. The legal team had acted swiftly after the greenhouse incident, processing Liu Qing's termination papers and filing for a restraining order by morning. What they couldn't anticipate was how quickly she would retaliate. The first emails arrived during the morning commute, strategically timed screenshots of Charan and Mr. Ye's marriage certificates sent to department heads, board members, and key clients. By the time Charan stepped off the elevator, the damage was already spreading through the company like wildfire. Did you see it? Emma Chen whispered to a colleague as Charan walked past. They were already married when she interviewed. The conversation abruptly ceased when they noticed her presence, replaced by pointed stares and hushed murmurs. The hostility in the air was palpable, far worse than the earlier rumors Liu Qing had circulated. This time, there was documented proof. Charan kept her head high as she made her way to her desk, though each step felt like walking through quicksand. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, colleagues connecting the dots between their CEO's sudden defense of his assistant and the shocking revelation of their secret marriage. The timing couldn't have been worse. Their fragile new understanding, barely formed in the aftermath of trauma, was now exposed to the harsh judgment of the entire company. The corporate fallout was immediate and severe. By mid-morning, 3 major clients had called to express concerns about ethical leadership and company stability. Studies show that negative publicity stemming from internal conflicts can lead to a 10 to 15% decrease in customer loyalty, a statistic becoming reality in real time as Liu Qing's emails reached more inboxes. The executive floor buzzed with crisis management activity as the PR team attempted to contain the situation, but the story was spreading too quickly. The boards called an emergency meeting for noon. Mr. Ye's voice came from behind her, startling Charan out of her thoughts. His face revealed nothing of the turmoil, maintaining the composed exterior she'd come to recognize as his professional armor. They're concerned about potential financial implications. Research shows corporate scandals can decrease market value by as much as 25%. Charan nodded, unsure what to say. This wasn't just about their private arrangement anymore. The entire company's reputation hung in the balance. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. Had she known her desperate decision to fulfill her mother's wish would jeopardize hundreds of jobs and millions in company valuation, would she have made a different choice? The whispers followed her throughout the morning. Colleagues who had begun to warm to her after the Gentech presentation now avoided eye contact in the hallways. In the break room, conversation stopped when she entered, only to resume in hushed tones the moment she left. The isolation felt like those first weeks all over again, except now the suspicion was based on evidence rather than Liu Qing's carefully planted rumors. "They're saying you tricked him into marriage for the position," her department colleague Jiaxin confided during a rare moment of sympathy. "Liu Qing sent follow-up emails claiming you manipulated him, using your mother's illness as a sob story." The cruelty of using her mother's condition as ammunition made Charan's stomach turn. Liu Qing had used every personal detail gleaned from her apartment break-in to craft the most damaging narrative possible. At precisely 2 p.m., an unexpected company-wide email arrived. All employees to gather in the main conference center immediately. Attendance mandatory. The unprecedented summons sent a wave of speculation through the building. Nothing like this had occurred in Ye Group's 15-year history. The conference center filled quickly as employees from all 18 floors filed in, eyeing each other nervously. Charan slipped in quietly, choosing a spot near the back. She could feel the weight of stares and the buzz of whispers around her. The board members sat in the front row, their expressions grave as they whispered among themselves. When Mr. Ye stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Gone was the reserved CEO, who rarely addressed more than a dozen people at once. In his place stood a man with unmistakable authority and unexpected vulnerability. "I'm addressing you directly because I respect you enough to hear the truth from me rather than through gossip," he began, his voice steady. "Yes, Ms. Wang and I are legally married, and yes, this preceded her employment at Ye Group." The direct confirmation sent a ripple of murmurs through the audience, which quickly subsided as he continued. What the emails from Ms. Liu failed to mention was that Ms. Wang was hired for her qualifications alone. Her resume showed promise, but her interview demonstrated exceptional critical thinking and problem-solving abilities. "Her work these past months has proven my assessment correct." He paused, letting his words sink in. Her personal connection to me was deliberately not disclosed to prevent exactly this type of speculation about her abilities. The silence in the room was heavy as employees processed this information. Charan felt her cheeks burning as hundreds of eyes turned toward her, but she kept her gaze fixed on Mr. Ye, drawing strength from his composed demeanor. "What you also don't know," Mr. Ye continued, his tone shifting subtly, "is that Liu Qing has engaged in a documented pattern of harassment against multiple employees over the years." The projection screen behind him illuminated with a timeline of incidents, dates, names, and brief descriptions of harassment complaints filed against Liu Qing, but buried through her family connections. 8 employees have filed formal complaints about Ms. Liu's behavior in the past 3 years. 3 of those employees ultimately resigned rather than continue working in a hostile environment. The screen changed to show redacted copies of complaint forms, exit interviews, and HR documentation. Each time, her family's influence protected her from consequences. The revelation sent shockwaves through the audience. Employees began turning to each other, sharing their own experiences in hushed tones. Charan watched as understanding dawned on face after face. How many of them had experienced Liu Qing's manipulation firsthand? How many had stayed silent, believing they were the only targets? Ms. Liu's termination was not a result of personal vendettas, but of documented misconduct, culminating in a physical threat against another employee. Mr. Yi's gaze swept across the room. At Ye Group, we do not tolerate harassment in any form, regardless of one's position or connections. Every employee deserves safety and respect in their workplace. A hesitant hand raised from the marketing department, one of Liu Qing's former team members. She threatened to ruin my career when I questioned her expense reports, the young woman said, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke. She said no one would believe me over her. Another voice joined from the back of the room. She took credit for my project last year and then had me transferred when I brought it up to management. One by one, employees began sharing their experiences. The dam had broken. Years of silent suffering giving way to public acknowledgement. What had begun as an exposure of Charan and Mr. Ye's marriage had transformed into a communal unburdening of the toxic culture Liu Qing had cultivated. As the meeting concluded, Mr. Ye made one final statement. Moving forward, Ye Group will implement improved reporting mechanisms for workplace harassment. No employee should feel helpless against mistreatment, regardless of who the perpetrator might be. The announcement was met with spontaneous applause, not the polite, obligatory kind, but genuine appreciation. While applause still echoed through the conference room for Mr. Yi's announcement of new harassment protocols, a more personal challenge awaited the unlikely couple. Their corporate alliance had weathered a public storm, but behind closed doors, they remained essentially strangers, bound by legal documentation and little else. The company crisis had ironically provided them with a convenient distraction from addressing the fundamental question of their relationship, one that now demanded an answer. The following evening, Mr. Ye waited by Charan's desk as she packed up her belongings. The office had emptied, leaving them in a rare moment of privacy amidst the deserted cubicles. He cleared his throat, straightening his already impeccable tie. "I've been considering our situation," he began, his normally confident voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. "The board seems satisfied with our explanation, but employees talk. The whispers won't stop unless we present a more convincing appearance of..." He paused, searching for the appropriate term. "Marital normalcy." Charan looked up, her expression guarded. "What exactly are you suggesting?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken implications. "I think you should move into my home," he stated, then quickly added, "The guest suite has a separate entrance and full privacy. It would help quell the gossip if we arrived at work together occasionally. People are watching us more closely than ever." The suggestion made practical sense, yet Charan felt her pulse quicken at the thought. His penthouse had remained an abstract concept until now. Moving there would make their arrangement tangibly real. "I'll need time to consider it," she replied, maintaining the professional tone they'd established. 3 days later, Charan stood in the marble foyer of Mr. Yi's penthouse, clutching a single suitcase containing her essential belongings. The space was immaculate, minimalist in design, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. It reflected its owner perfectly, elegant, precise, and revealing nothing of substance about the man himself. "The guest suite is through here," he directed, leading her down a hallway adorned with abstract artwork. "I've cleared half the closet space and stocked the bathroom with necessities." The efficiency of his preparations spoke volumes. He'd approached her move as he would any business transaction, with thorough planning and zero sentimentality. Their first dinner together in his home was a masterclass in awkwardness. Seated at opposite ends of a dining table that could comfortably seat 12, they exchanged pleasantries about work matters while studiously avoiding any personal topics. The clink of silverware against fine china punctuated the stilted conversation. "This arrangement doesn't have to be uncomfortable," Mr. Ye finally said, setting down his wine glass. "Perhaps we should learn something about each other beyond our professional capacities." Charan looked up, surprised by the suggestion. "What would you like to know?" The simplicity of her question seemed to catch him off guard. After a moment's consideration, he asked, "What do you enjoy reading?" It was such an ordinary question that Charan almost laughed. The mighty CEO of Ye Group wanted to know about her reading habits. "Classical literature mostly. I find comfort in stories that have endured for generations." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Interesting. I have a first edition collection of classical works in my study. Perhaps you'd like to borrow some." This small revelation, that the intimidating Mr. Ye collected classic literature, created the first genuine connection between them. By the following week, they had established a cautious routine. Morning coffee shared in comfortable silence before leaving for work. Brief discussions of their respective days over dinner. Occasional literary recommendations that revealed more about their personalities than either intended. One evening, Charan's phone rang during dinner. She excused herself to answer it, returning minutes later with tears glistening in her eyes. "Is everything all right?" Mr. Ye asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. "It's my mother," Charan replied, her voice wavering. "The doctors are calling it a remarkable recovery. The new treatment is working. She'll be discharged next week." The news hung between them, its implications immediately apparent to both. The catalyst for their hasty marriage, Charan's desperate need to fulfill her dying mother's wish, had suddenly vanished. The practical foundation of their arrangement had crumbled, leaving them in uncharted territory. "That's wonderful news," Mr. Ye said quietly, his expression unreadable. "You must be relieved." "I am," Charan confirmed, though her tone suggested complexity beyond simple relief. "But it changes things between us, doesn't it?" Mr. Ye set his napkin aside, his posture shifting subtly. "I suppose we need to discuss where we go from here." The conversation they'd both avoided now became unavoidable. They moved to the living room, sitting across from each other like negotiating parties. "The initial arrangement served its purpose," Mr. Ye acknowledged, his tone measured. "Your mother's wish has been fulfilled, and the company situation has stabilized. Logically, we could pursue an annulment with minimal disruption." Charan nodded, trying to ignore the unexpected hollow feeling his words created. That would be the sensible option. A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sound of traffic below. Neither moved to continue the conversation, as if waiting for the other to make the final decision. "Is that what you want?" Mr. Ye finally asked, his voice softer than Charan had ever heard it. The question caught her off guard. "I thought that was the agreement, a temporary arrangement with a clear end date." "It was," he admitted, "but circumstances change. People change." He paused, seemingly struggling with what to say next, a stark contrast to his usual eloquence. "These past weeks, living here together, they've been unexpectedly pleasant." Charan studied his face, searching for signs of pity or obligation. "We shouldn't confuse convenience with compatibility." "I'm not confused," Mr. Ye replied with unexpected firmness. "I'm suggesting that perhaps we've built something worth exploring further." His words hung in the air between them, a proposition more surprising than their initial marriage arrangement. This wasn't a business proposal, but something far more dangerous, an invitation to vulnerability. "Are you asking this out of some sense of duty?" Charan questioned, needing to understand his motivation. "Or because it's convenient for appearances at work?" Mr. Ye considered her words carefully before responding. "I'm asking because for the first time in years, I look forward to coming home in the evenings. Because our conversations about 19th century literature have become the highlight of my week. Because I find myself wondering what you're thinking when you look out the window during breakfast." The raw honesty in his voice stripped away the careful professionalism they'd maintained. This wasn't the calculated CEO speaking, but simply a man acknowledging unexpected feelings. "I don't know how to do this," Charan admitted. "We did everything backward. Most people date, fall in love, then marry. We started with legal documentation, and are only now considering whether we actually like each other." A smile, genuine and unguarded, transformed Mr. Ye's usually serious face. Then perhaps that's where we should begin. Dating, while technically already married. The absurdity of their situation struck them both simultaneously, resulting in shared laughter that dissolved the tension. It was the first time they'd laughed together, and the sound changed something fundamental between them. "So we stay married, but start dating?" Charan clarified, the concept both ridiculous and strangely appealing. "I believe that's the unconventional proposal I'm making." "Yes," Mr. Ye confirmed, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "We take time to discover if there's something real between us, beyond the circumstances that brought us together." While Charan and Mr. Ye cautiously explored the uncharted territory of their relationship, Liu Qing's obsession festered in the shadows, transforming from mere jealousy into something far more dangerous. Her fixation had breached the restraining order multiple times, with police reports documenting her parked car outside their residence on 7 separate occasions. What began as professional rivalry had metastasized into something pathological, a destructive force that would ultimately consume its host before its intended targets. The first indication of how deep Liu Qing's deception ran came unexpectedly during a routine financial audit. A junior accountant noticed discrepancies in the marketing department's expense reports, small irregularities that individually might have been overlooked, but together formed a disturbing pattern spanning nearly 4 years. When presented with these findings, Mr. Ye authorized a comprehensive forensic investigation that revealed Liu Qing had systematically embezzled nearly 2.7 million yuan through elaborately disguised vendor contracts and falsified reimbursements. The specific charges and penalties would depend on the evidence gathered, explained the lead investigator, whose team uncovered offshore accounts where Liu Qing had concealed her stolen funds. The money trail led to luxury purchases, a vacation property in Bali, designer clothing collections still bearing tags, and art pieces acquired under assumed names. These extravagances far exceeded what her substantial but legitimate salary could support, painting a picture of someone whose outward perfection required continuous financial fuel. The embezzlement alone would have meant criminal charges, but it was merely the first thread in an unraveling tapestry of misconduct. Its security professionals, initially tasked with examining her digital footprint related to Charan's harassment, discovered something far more sinister. Liu Qing maintained encrypted folders containing sensitive information on executives, board members, and even competitors. She had systematically collected compromising material, from financial indiscretions to extramarital affairs, creating a private insurance policy against anyone who might stand in her way. As the investigation widened, former employees began coming forward with accounts that now made terrible sense. A previous executive assistant described being pressured to share Mr. Ye's private calendar in exchange for Liu Qing's protection from restructuring cuts. A junior marketing team member revealed how Liu Qing had threatened to blame a major campaign failure on him unless he reported back on a rival director's movements. Each story formed part of a disturbing mosaic. Liu Qing had built her professional ascent not on merit, but through calculated manipulation and fear. The corporate investigative team worked closely with law enforcement, building a case that grew more substantial by the day. Workplace harassment charges accumulated as victims found courage in numbers, with evidence suggesting Liu Qing had engaged in patterns of stalking against at least 3 employees who had rebuffed her demands. The potential legal consequences mounted: criminal charges for embezzlement, corporate espionage, harassment, stalking, and attempted assault. Each offense carried significant penalties that, combined, could result in substantial prison time. Despite the mounting evidence and pending charges, Liu Qing remained dangerously fixated. Security footage from Ye Group's parking garage captured her attempting to access the building 3 weeks after her termination, wearing a service uniform and carrying falsified credentials. 2 days later, a delivery person reported a woman matching her description had attempted to bribe them into allowing her to deliver a package personally to Charan's office. The final confrontation came on a rainy Tuesday evening as Charan arrived home alone. Liu Qing emerged from between parked cars, her designer clothes exchanged for nondescript attire, her carefully maintained appearance now disheveled. Security cameras captured her approaching Charan with what appeared to be a small object concealed in her palm. Before she could reach her target, private security personnel Mr. Ye had hired intercepted Liu Qing, restraining her until police arrived. The object, later identified as a syringe containing a sedative, provided the final evidence needed for attempted assault charges. The courtroom scene 3 months later presented a stark contrast to Liu Qing's former polished persona. Gone were the tailored suits and confident posture that had once commanded attention in boardrooms. The woman who faced the judge appeared diminished, her responses hollow, as charges were read aloud. The prosecution detailed a pattern of behavior spanning years: financial crimes, harassment, stalking, and finally, premeditated violence. Psychological evaluation reports submitted to the court revealed what specialists described as severe narcissistic personality traits, combined with obsessive tendencies that deteriorated under perceived rejection. The evaluation noted Liu Qing exhibited distorted thinking patterns that justified increasingly extreme actions while remaining convinced of her rightness. Individuals exhibiting these obsessive behaviors often require psychological intervention to address underlying causes. The court-appointed psychiatrist testified, recommending intensive therapy alongside any penal measures. The most poignant moment came unexpectedly during victim impact statements. When Charan approached the podium, the courtroom tensed, anticipating righteous anger. Instead, she spoke with measured compassion about the genuine tragedy unfolding before them. A woman of remarkable intelligence and capability, whose distorted perspectives had led her down a destructive path. "What we're witnessing isn't triumph over an enemy," Charan said quietly, "but the collapse of someone who could have achieved greatness through her talents alone." The judge's sentence reflected both the severity of Liu Qing's actions and her evident psychological issues. 5 years imprisonment, with eligibility for transfer to a psychiatric facility after serving 2 years, mandatory participation in intensive therapy programs, and substantial financial restitution to both the company and individual victims. Rehabilitation in cases involving obsessive fixations varies widely in success, the judge noted, but the opportunity for treatment must be provided alongside consequences. As Liu Qing was led from the courtroom, she glanced back once at Charan and Mr. Ye. Something unreadable passed across her face, perhaps the first flicker of recognition that her obsession had cost her everything, while ultimately strengthening the bond between the very people she had tried to destroy. The courtroom doors closed behind her, symbolically ending a chapter that had tested Charan and Mr. Ye in ways neither could have anticipated when their unconventional arrangement began. In the aftermath, Mr. Ye implemented comprehensive workplace protections beyond standard corporate policies. Anonymous reporting systems, mandatory training on recognizing toxic behaviors, and clear escalation paths for concerns transformed company culture. The narrative underscores the potential for workplace rivalry and romantic jealousy to escalate into severe legal and personal consequences, Mr. Ye explained during a business conference, where he shared the case as a learning opportunity for other executives. For Charan, the resolution brought mixed emotions, relief mingled with sadness for the wasted potential, and gratitude for surviving, intertwined with the sobering knowledge of how quickly ordinary professional jealousy could transform into something monstrous. The experience had forced her to develop strengths she hadn't known she possessed: resilience, discernment, and the capacity for compassion, even towards someone who had tried to harm her. The strength of Charan and Mr. Ye's relationship lies not in its perfect beginning, but in how they faced adversity together. Their bond, forged in the crucible of Liu Qing's threats, demonstrates that vulnerability can become a foundation for profound connection. Through each challenge, they discovered the courage to lower their defenses and support one another. What makes their story remarkable isn't the conventional path of romance, but their willingness to choose each other repeatedly, despite overwhelming obstacles. Their journey shows us that relationships don't require perfect circumstances to flourish. They need only two people brave enough to remain open when instinct urges protection and withdrawal.